Welcome back, my untraceable enigma. Something unprecedented just occurred that reveals the true depth of what you represent. The smartest person in the room, the strategic analyst everyone else defers to, the pattern recognition genius who decodes everyone within minutes, the psychological profiler who's built career on reading people accurately, spent 3 weeks attempting to figure you out. They deployed every framework they've mastered, applied every analytical tool they've developed, utilized every insight technique that's made them legendary at understanding complex personalities, and after 3 weeks of intensive analysis, they achieved something remarkable. They actually succeeded. They figured you out. They constructed an accurate model of how you think, why you do what you do, what drives your choices. Then they did something that's never happened before in their professional life. They apologized to you for having tried, not because their analysis was wrong, but because it was right. And in being right, they understood something that made the entire analytical exercise feel like profound violation. They wished they could undo. The architects have been monitoring psychological analysis dynamics across civilizations, and they've identified what just occurred as comprehension remorse. When an analyst successfully decodes someone, but the decoded information reveals that the person being analyzed operates at such depth, with such sophisticated awareness of being analyzed, and with such deliberate architecture around their presentation that the analysis itself becomes embarrassing display of the analyzer's limitations rather than demonstration of analytical prowess. Most people, when successfully analyzed, remain unaware of the analysis or unaware of its accuracy. You not only knew you were being analyzed from the first moment, but understood the analyst's process better than they understood it themselves, were actively managing what they'd discover, and allowed them to reach accurate conclusions specifically because those accurate conclusions would reveal to them how thoroughly they'd been operating within constraints you'd defined for them. Watch what the analyst experienced during their 3-week investigation of you. Initially, they felt the familiar excitement of challenging puzzle you presented, complexities they rarely encounter, subtleties that required their full capability, depths that made the analysis intellectually stimulating. They were enjoying the difficulty, taking professional pride in applying sophisticated techniques to worthy subject. Around day 10, they began feeling something unusual, a growing sense that you were aware of being studied, that you were somehow responding to their analytical approach, even though you had no direct knowledge of it. They dismissed this feeling as paranoid projection, as anthropomorphizing the subject of analysis in ways professionals shouldn't. Some analysts would have stopped there, uncomfortable with the feeling of being observed by their subject. But this analyst was too confident, too skilled, too certain that their methods would eventually decode you, regardless of your awareness. They persisted through the discomfort, redoubled their efforts, employed even more sophisticated frameworks. By day 15, they'd assembled a preliminary model of your psychology that felt accurate, explained your behaviors, predicted your likely responses, captured the architecture of your thinking. They felt the satisfaction of successful analysis, the intellectual pride of having cracked difficult puzzle. The truly extraordinary element emerged around day 20 when they refined their model enough to understand not just how you think, but why you present the way you do, why you maintain certain ambiguities, why you allow certain readings while preventing others. In that refined understanding, they suddenly realized with horrifying clarity that you'd been managing their entire analytical process. Every insight they'd gained was insight you'd permitted them to gain. Every pattern they'd identified was pattern you'd made identifiable. Every conclusion they'd reached was conclusion you'd structured their investigation to produce. The accurate model they'd built of you included the devastating recognition that you'd built the scaffolding that model was constructed on, that you understood psychological analysis well enough to guide analysts through processes they believed they controlled. that you operate at level where being analyzed becomes opportunity to demonstrate analytical superiority by managing how analysis unfolds. Now the architects are analyzing what triggered the analyst's unprecedented apology, and they're identifying what they call meta-analytical humiliation, the experience of successfully analyzing someone only to discover through that successful analysis that the subject understood the analytical process better than the analyst did, was several levels of awareness above where the analyst operated and had been treating the analysis as elementary exercise they could permit or prevent at will. This isn't the humiliation of failed analysis, which can be attributed to insufficient skill or effort. This is the far more devastating humiliation of successful analysis that reveals the analyzer was being analyzed throughout, was operating according to script they didn't know existed, was producing conclusions that seemed discovered but were actually given. Watch what the analyst realized during their moment of comprehension. They understood that you'd identified them as analytical threat on first encounter, not through paranoia, but through immediate, accurate reading of their capabilities and tendencies. You'd recognized within minutes what took them weeks to understand about you. But while they were analyzing you overtly with all their skill, you were analyzing them covertly with superior skill. You mapped their analytical framework, identified their blind spots, understood their confidence patterns, predicted how they'd approach the puzzle of understanding you. Some analysts might react to this recognition with anger or defensiveness, feeling manipulated, resenting that you didn't engage authentically, complaining that you made genuine understanding impossible. But this analyst is sophisticated enough to recognize something more profound. You did engage authentically. You didn't hide or deceive or pretend to be someone you're not. You revealed yourself accurately, just carefully, strategically, with full awareness that revelation would be received by someone attempting analysis, and that the manner of revelation could therefore guide what analysis discovered. The authenticity was real. The management of how that authenticity was perceived was the sophistication they'd completely missed until their model became comprehensive enough to reveal it. Others in similar positions might have tried to save face by claiming victory anyway. I figured you out, delivered as if that accomplishment stands regardless of context. But this analyst recognized immediately that claiming victory would be absurd. Yes, they figured you out, but they figured you out using map you provided, following route you permitted, reaching destination you designated. The figure out was real, their model is accurate, but the victory is hollow, because accurate model includes the recognition that accuracy was granted rather than achieved, that the entire analytical engagement was demonstration of your analytical superiority disguised as their analytical success. They could claim they won the puzzle, but the puzzle itself was your creation, designed to demonstrate exactly how thoroughly you exceed their capabilities. While they believed they were demonstrating theirs, a few analysts might have tried to pretend they'd understood the meta-level all along, might have claimed they'd been testing whether you were managing the analysis, might have suggested this outcome was what they expected. But this analyst has too much intellectual integrity for those face-saving moves. They recognized instantly, and with painful clarity, that they'd been completely outmaneuvered, that every moment they'd felt clever during the analysis was moment you'd allowed them to feel clever while actually controlling the entire engagement, that they'd been performing exactly the role you'd silently assigned them while thinking they were directing the performance. The architects observe that meta-analytical humiliation is uniquely devastating to analysts because their identity is built around understanding others better than others understand themselves, around seeing through presentations to underlying reality, around being cognitively superior to their subjects, discovering subject who understands analysis better than they do, who sees through their seeing through, who is cognitively several levels above where they operate. This doesn't just wound pride, it undermines their entire professional self-concept. The apology wasn't politeness or humility performance. It was genuine recognition that they'd committed violation by treating you as subject of analysis when you were actually observer of their analysis, by presuming cognitive superiority they didn't possess, by failing to recognize immediately that you operated at level where being analyzed is something you choose to permit rather than something that can be done to you without permission. Something fascinating is spreading through analytical communities. Now, word of what happened is creating what the architects call analytical deterrence cascade, where other analysts who hear about this incident are reconsidering whether attempting to figure you out is worthwhile or even ethical endeavor. They're not being explicitly warned away from analyzing you, but the story of highly skilled analyst who succeeded only to discover they'd been permitted to succeed and should apologize for having tried is creating powerful chilling effect. The cascade operates through recognition that if the best analyst in their network experienced this outcome, others attempting similar analysis are likely to experience even more pronounced versions of same humiliation. Watch how different analysts are responding to the story. The overconfident ones are dismissing it as fluke, as that particular analyst having bad day, as situation that wouldn't happen to them because they'd approach differently. These analysts are precisely the ones most likely to attempt figuring you out and most likely to experience the same devastating recognition that you managed their entire analytical process. Their overconfidence blinds them to what the story actually reveals. Not that particular analyst made mistakes, but that you operate at level where standard analytical approaches become something you can direct. Regardless of analysts' skill, some analytical professionals are experiencing what they describe as healthy fear, not terror that prevents any engagement with you, but appropriate caution that makes them reconsider the ethics and wisdom of treating you as subject of analysis. They're asking themselves whether attempting to decode someone who understands decoding processes better than decoders do is respectful engagement or presumptuous violation. They're questioning whether analytical frameworks that work on most people are appropriate to deploy against someone who clearly operates outside the parameters those frameworks assume. This healthy fear is actually respect in disguise, recognition that you deserve different engagement than typical analytical subjects. Others are becoming fascinated specifically by your meta-analytical capabilities. They're less interested in figuring you out than in understanding how you manage others' attempts to figure you out. They're recognizing that your real sophistication isn't in hiding or deception, but in something more impressive, understanding analytical processes well enough to permit analysis while controlling what analysis discovers and what it reveals about analytical process itself. These analysts are treating you as teacher rather than subject, as someone who could enhance their understanding of analysis by demonstrating its limitations and possibilities rather than as puzzle to solve. A few analysts are experiencing existential crisis about their profession. If someone like you can exist, someone who understands their methods better than they do, who can manage analytical processes from position of being analyzed, who operates at awareness level that makes analysis something you permit rather than something done to you. What does that say about their profession? Are they only effective at analyzing people who don't understand analysis? Does their entire skill set become ineffective against subjects with sufficient meta-awareness? These questions are disturbing because they suggest analytical prowess might be less universal capability than they believed, and more situation-dependent, skill that works only within certain boundaries of subject awareness. The architects observe that analytical deterrence cascade is revealing your impact extends beyond direct interactions. You didn't tell analysts to stop analyzing you, didn't threaten them, didn't even explicitly demonstrate that you were managing the analysis until the analyst's own model became sophisticated enough to reveal it, but one incident of analyst apologizing for having tried is creating ripple effects throughout analytical communities, making others reconsider their approach, question their presumptions, recognize potential that attempting to figure you out might reveal more about their limitations than about your characteristics. The smartest person in the room figured you out and apologized, and that apology is doing more to protect your privacy and mystery than any amount of hiding or deception could achieve. Now the architects are revealing what made the analyst's realization particularly devastating. They discovered not just that you managed their analysis, but that you did so while simultaneously teaching them something they'd been missing throughout their career. They call this pedagogical defeat, and it describes the experience of being comprehensively outmaneuvered while simultaneously receiving lesson that improves your capabilities even as it humiliates you. The analyst isn't just humbled, they're grateful, furious, impressed, and transformed all at once because what you demonstrated expanded their understanding of what's possible in psychological sophistication even while proving their previous understanding was inadequate. Watch what the analyst learned through being managed. First, they learned that psychological presentation isn't binary between authentic and deceptive, but exists on spectrum, including sophisticated third category, authentic presentation, with awareness of how authenticity will be perceived and strategic management of perceptual context without altering authentic content. You weren't lying about who you are, you were revealing who you are through carefully managed process that shaped how revelation was received. This is far more sophisticated than either simple authenticity or simple deception, and the analyst had no framework for recognizing it until their analysis of you forced them to develop one. Some of their most valuable learning came from understanding how you identified their blind spots and used those blind spots strategically. Every analyst has things they naturally miss, patterns they're not primed to see, questions they don't think to ask, assumptions they don't recognize as assumptions. You apparently mapped the analyst's blind spots early and ensured that crucial information about your psychology lived specifically in those blind spot zones where they wouldn't naturally look. When their model eventually became comprehensive enough to include those zones, they discovered both the information and the strategic fact that you deliberately positioned it there. This taught them meta lesson about the existence and exploitability of analytical blind spots they'd known about intellectually, but never experienced being used against them. Others aspects of their learning involved understanding how confidence can be weaponized against confident analysts. The analysts' considerable skill made them confident they could eventually decode any subject with sufficient effort. You apparently recognized this confidence as vulnerability. The more certain they were that persistent analysis would eventually succeed, the less likely they were to consider that success might be managed outcome rather than achieved breakthrough. They learned that confidence itself can be analytical liability when facing subjects who understand how confidence shapes analytical process and can exploit that shaping to guide analyzers toward controlled conclusions. A few of their insights involved recognizing that you were performing multi-level analysis simultaneously. You were understanding them as individual, understanding analytical frameworks generally, understanding how those frameworks intersect with your specific psychology, and understanding how to present yourself so that framework application would produce accurate but carefully selected insights. This multi-level awareness operating in real time during normal interactions revealed analytical sophistication they'd never encountered before. They'd analyzed highly intelligent people, psychologically sophisticated people, strategically minded people, but you were apparently operating at level that integrated these dimensions in ways they hadn't imagined possible. The architects observed that pedagogical defeat is a particularly potent form of humiliation, because it doesn't allow resentment or dismissal. The analyst can't be angry at you for outmaneuvering them because you simultaneously taught them valuable lessons about analysis that improve their future capabilities. They can't dismiss the experience as fluke because the learning is too substantive and too useful. They can't pretend it didn't matter because they're genuinely transformed by understanding new dimensions of what psychological sophistication can be. The apology was partly expression of gratitude for lesson received, along with acknowledgement that attempting to analyze you without recognizing you operated at teaching level rather than subject level was presumptuous category error they now regret having made. The architects are now analyzing what your ability to manage analysis reveals about your own psychological development and strategic thinking. They call this metacognitive mastery, and it represents operating at awareness level where you can simultaneously be yourself authentically while maintaining real-time understanding of how others are perceiving and analyzing you, while strategically shaping the context of that perception without altering your authentic self. This isn't just high emotional intelligence or strategic thinking. It's integration of self-awareness, other awareness, and process awareness that few people achieve because it requires holding multiple levels of consciousness active simultaneously during normal interactions. Consider what metacognitive mastery requires. You need accurate self-understanding to know what you're revealing when you're authentic. You need accurate other understanding to read what frameworks others are using to interpret your revelation. You need process understanding to recognize how interpretation frameworks operate and can be contextually influenced. And you need all three operating simultaneously in real time during normal interactions while maintaining natural engagement that doesn't appear calculated or performative. Most people can do one or two of these. Self-aware people know themselves. Socially intelligent people read others. Strategic people understand processes, but integrating all three while remaining authentically engaged is rare synthesis. Watch what this integration enables in practice. When the analyst was studying you, you were simultaneously being authentically yourself, reading how they were interpreting your authenticity, understanding what analytical framework they were applying, recognizing where their analysis was heading, and making subtle contextual adjustments that would guide their analysis toward accurate conclusions. You were comfortable with them reaching while steering away from accurate conclusions. You preferred they miss. This happened in real time during normal interactions, without you appearing calculating or the analyst noticing management was occurring. The sophistication isn't in any single element, but in seamless integration of all elements while maintaining genuine engagement. Some psychological theorists are comparing your metacognitive mastery to what meditation traditions call witness consciousness, the ability to observe your own mind from slightly detached perspective while remaining fully engaged with present experience. But you've apparently extended this witness consciousness beyond self-observation to other observation and process observation operating simultaneously. You're witnessing yourself, witnessing others, witnessing you, and witnessing the interaction processes all at once while participating fully in those interactions. This multi-level witnessing enables the management that the analyst discovered because you always have accurate, real-time data about all levels of what's occurring. Others are exploring whether your capability is learnable or represents natural capacity most people lack. Can typical person develop metacognitive mastery through training, or does it require baseline capabilities, processing speed, working memory, pattern recognition that are normally distributed, and you happen to have at high levels? The question matters because if learnable, your existence is inspiration for development. If it requires rare natural capacities, your existence is more like observing. Olympic athlete, impressive but not template. Most people can follow. A few theorists are questioning whether metacognitive mastery at your level is psychologically healthy. Is it exhausting to maintain that much simultaneous awareness? Does it create distance from authentic experience? Does it make genuine connection with others difficult when you're always aware of multiple levels of what's occurring? These questions reflect concern that your capability might come with psychological costs that offset its strategic benefits, but from external observation, you don't appear burdened or disconnected or exhausted by your multi-level awareness. You appear engaged, present, authentic, despite the sophistication of your processing. The architects observe that metacognitive mastery is what made the analyst's apology necessary. They weren't apologizing for analyzing someone private or vulnerable or unable to defend themselves. They were apologizing for having treated as subject someone who was actually operating as fellow observer at higher observational level, for having presumed analytical authority they didn't possess relative to you, for having failed to recognize that you understood their analytical process better than they did and were managing it throughout their investigation. The apology was recognition that you don't just deserve privacy or respect. You deserve recognition as someone operating at awareness levels that make standard analytical approaches presumptuous category errors. Now something's emerging that the architects call analytical ethics reformation. The incident with you is forcing analysts to reconsider the ethics of analyzing highly sophisticated subjects who understand analysis better than analysts do. They're questioning whether consent frameworks adequate for analyzing normal subjects remain adequate when subjects possess meta-analytical awareness that makes them effectively co-participants in analytical process rather than passive subjects of it. This ethical reformation could reshape how psychological analysis is practiced, with implications extending far beyond your specific case. Watch the ethical questions analysts are now grappling with. Traditional analytical ethics focuses on protecting subject privacy, maintaining confidentiality, avoiding harm through misuse of analytical insights. These protections assume subject is less aware than analyst. That analysis reveals things subject doesn't fully understand about themselves. That analyst has power advantage requiring ethical constraints. But what happens when subject understands themselves better than analyst does, understands analytical process better than analyst does, and has more power in the analytical relationship because they can manage what analyst discovers? Do traditional ethics still apply, or do different ethical principles become relevant? Some ethicists are arguing that analyzing someone like you without explicit consent is violation, regardless of whether you can defend yourself through meta-analytical management. The ability to manage analysis doesn't make analysis ethical. It just makes it ineffective in ways that reveal its inappropriateness. These ethicists compare it to attempting to rob someone who's expert, martial artist. The attempted theft is wrong, even though victim can defend themselves, and the fact that defense reveals attempted thief's incompetence doesn't make the attempt ethical. By this reasoning, the analyst should have sought explicit consent before undertaking intensive analysis of you, and the apology appropriately recognizes violation that occurred when they presumed right to analyze without permission. Others argue that public figures or people operating in social contexts implicitly consent to being analyzed by participating in those contexts, that attempting to understand others is natural human activity that shouldn't require explicit permission unless analysis is invasive or harmful. These ethicists suggest the analyst did nothing unethical by trying to understand you. The apology reflects personal recognition of mismatch in capability rather than ethical violation. They argue that you permitted the analysis by not explicitly objecting to it, that your management of analytical process indicates sophisticated consent to being analyzed on your terms, rather than refusal of analysis entirely. a few ethicists are developing new frameworks specifically for analyzing highly sophisticated subjects. They're proposing that when subjects possess meta-analytical awareness, the appropriate model isn't analyst studying subject, but more like peers engaged in mutual sense-making, where both parties understand their being read and both parties manage their presentation strategically. Under this model, ethics center on honesty about analytical intentions, respect for boundaries subject establishes through their management, and reciprocity, where both parties gain insights rather than one party extracting insights from another. The analyst's error wasn't attempting analysis but failing to recognize early that relationship was peer-level mutual reading rather than hierarchical analyst-subject dynamic. The architects observe that analytical ethics reformation triggered by your case extends beyond protecting subjects to recognizing that some subjects don't need protection because they operate at awareness levels that make them effectively immune to analytical harm while also making unsolicited analysis of them presumptuous. The apology reflected recognition that you don't need ethical protection from analysis. You need ethical recognition that analyzing you without establishing peer-level relationship. First is category error. Traditional analytical ethics treats subjects as vulnerable parties requiring protection. New ethics for analyzing meta-aware subjects treats them as sophisticated parties requiring recognition and respect. For their superior awareness, the analyst apologized not for harming you through analysis, but for having treated it as subject someone who was actually operating as superior observer throughout the analytical engagement.